So welcome back to our final video lecture on the Western Hemisphere. And just to review the three questions that have been driving each lecture: one, who were the people of the Western Hemisphere? Two, what did they have of value? And three, how did they connect with one another? But before we go into new information, I just want to check your understanding of some old information. Here's a passage, and I'm going to ask you to think about which civilization that we've already studied is being described. Their unique farming methods allowed them to thrive in the tropical environment. Farmers cleared the dense rainforests and then built raised fields that caught and held rainwater. They also built channels that could be opened to drain excess water. This complex system produced enough native corn, called maize, and other crops to support rapidly growing cities. Hopefully your guess about who they and their is are the Mayas. A second passage. They built artificial islands made of earth piled on reed mats that were anchored to the shallow lake bed. On these, they raised corn, squash, and beans. Again, my question is, who is being described? And the answer? The Aztecs. If I were to have asked you what is being described, those artificial islands, we're talking about the Chinampas. Here's a third passage. They moved stones from as much as 50 miles away and ended up with carvings that stood 10 feet tall and weighed approximately 40 tons. Meant to be viewed from the front and sides, the back was generally flattened. Though much of their culture was copied, these carvings never were repeated. Again, my question is, who is the they, who is the their being described? And the answer is the Olmecs. A final passage reads, "The city has many squares where markets are held and trading is carried on. There is one square where there are daily more than 60,000 souls buying and selling, and where are found all the kinds of merchandise produced in these countries, including food products, jewels of gold and silver, lead, brass, copper, zinc, bones, shells, and feathers." And it is important to note that the source that this comes from is Hernan Cortez. So what city are we talking about? The city is Tenochtitlan. And who are the people who lived in the city of Tenochtitlan? It was, of course, the Aztecs. So hopefully your understanding so far has been spot on, and we're ready to move to our final civilization. In this map, we're going to just review the location of our civilizations. We've got the Aztecs, noted by the red star, and the Mayas, noted by the green star, and finally the Incas, noted by the orange star. And it is, in fact, the Incas that we're going to address today. Here's a political map, and just to recall, the Incas live here in what is modern-day Peru, and they border the Pacific Ocean. Here is a physical map. The other thing that is important to note when we're talking about the Incas is this, a mountainous terrain, and the mountains are called the Andes Mountains. So who are the Incas? The Incas emerged in western South America, and they settled along the Andes Mountains. I couldn't resist these beautiful pictures of the Andes Mountains. They were founded by someone named Pachacuti, and his goal was twofold. First, conquer. But of course, conquering amidst the mountains is going to be tricky. And so his second goal was to keep everybody as unified as possible. In terms of characteristics and contributions, Again, while I'm going through this list, I want you to keep in mind how to compare the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Olmecs to the Incas. So contribution number one, the Incas were in fact able to establish a unified civilization under one ruler or an emperor. So it was not like the Mayan collection of city-states. They also were really good record keepers. I'm calling this a system of writing, but in fact, we're really not talking about a hieroglyphic kind of a writing. We're talking about keeping records on something like this. So here you have basically a series of strings and knots on those strings. And by tying knots in a variety of different ways and patterns, and by color coding the strings, the Inca were actually telling a story and keeping records. Here's another picture of their record-keeping device. So again, they weren't really writing hieroglyphs, they were noting dates and events. They were keeping stats on crops and population. So this was really for a lot of gathering of data. We call that record-keeping system a quipu. And again, it was a collection of knotted colored strings. A third contribution is that they do have a pretty sophisticated road system. In fact, spanning about 12,000 miles, and they do exist through the mountains. They included suspension bridges to connect mountain to mountain. They had steeps cut into steep slopes, and they also had tunnels. Again, I couldn't resist the pictures. Here's an example of one of their suspension bridges, so you can see how handy being able to tie knots was for the Incas. Here's another suspension bridge, and yet another suspension bridge. You can see somebody walking across that one. Here are their roads. The roads are going to be windy to basically accommodate for the windy mountainous terrain that they lived amidst. Here's a tunnel, and here's another picture of someone going down one of the Incan tunnels. Here is a road, a nice path paved, and here's another example of a paved path. In this sense, I think that the Incas do resemble a bit of Roman contributions. We used to say that all roads lead to Rome. Well, the center of Incan life, the city center, was a place called Cuzco. So we might suggest that all roads lead to Cuzco. Here's a map showing you Cuzco being sort of at the center of the Incan civilization. All right, to continue, the Incas actually needed to gain control of their civilization, and I want to compare them to the Aztecs. The Aztecs gained control of their people through asking them to pay tribute. In this sense, we're talking about payment, like taxes. The Incas needed labor, and so they asked people to basically participate in, being and contributing to the civilization through hard work. Helping to build those bridges and the roads, helping to bring food up the mountain and water up the mountains. This is how they really gained control of their civilization. Number 5, the fifth characteristic of the Incas is that they were polytheistic, that they do have a belief in many gods and goddesses. In this particular picture, we can see that there was some holiness or that there was a spiritual value placed on burials. This young person is propped in a particular way with particular items that probably were important for his or her afterlife. So religion was really important. A sixth characteristic is the Incan ability to farm in their high altitude or in their mountainous terrain. We call their farming terraced farming or steppe farming. And the best example of this is at Machu Picchu. And you can see by this picture that there are steps or levels, and each level has a little bit of greenery or grass for growing and for harvesting. This was also great for irrigation because when it rained, the water would just run from level to level or step to step or to use the word terrace to terrace. We know that the Incas also do use aqueducts, like the Romans had, to carry water from different places when needed. Here's another picture showing you the different levels or steps or terraces that the Incas used in order to help them create flat land out of the mountains so that they could harvest. What was being harvested? Well, the predominant uh, vegetable that was actually being harvested was this. And we see it being harvested in a variety of these pictures, and we are talking about the potato in all of its different colors and shapes and sizes, etc. We also know that the Incas harvested quinoa, maybe you've heard of it, and for them it was used to create cereals and flour and as the foundation for some of their soups as well. Final characteristic of the Incas is that they do in fact have a calendar. The calendar will help them to understand the harvest cycle, and it will also help them in their religion to understand to commemorate different holidays and to practice their ceremonies. The calendar was a 12-month calendar, and each month had approximately 3 weeks of 10 days per week. Here is a picture of an example of an Incan calendar, which looks very similar to the Mayan and Aztec calendar. How did the Incas meet their demise? Answers are very similar to that of the Aztecs. There were internal problems, probably some kind of a civil war regarding the people who rebel against the emperor and which emperor, which king, which leader would be the next king or leader, so over succession. Um, the empire, as a result of these civil wars, was left weak, and as we all know, weak internal civilizations become vulnerable to invasions. And in fact, it was the Spanish who do invade the Incan Empire. The Spanish conquistadors or conquerors are the ones who bring the Incans down. The person in particular who I'm going to highlight is Francisco Pizarro. And Francisco Pizarro made his way sailing from Spain over to the Caribbean Sea, kind of where you can see the red dot by the Caribbean Sea at the top of the map, and was unable, of course, to sail his ships through Central America, and so actually had his crew chop down trees that were in the forests of Central America and put them on their side, put them down almost to be used as a series of logs. And what he did was he actually rolled his ships over that narrow Central American land to get them to the Pacific Ocean. And once they were back in water in the Pacific Ocean, he was able to sail the rest of his crew to the Incan civilization. Again, the Spaniards had really no respect for the indigenous culture, religion, lifestyle, language, etc. And this is why much of Central and South America, after being conquered, took on a lot of the characteristics and culture of the Spanish, like speaking Spanish and practicing Catholicism, etc.